The battlefield looked abandoned. Frontline troops had withdrawn, villages stood eerily empty, and Ukrainian radars powered down. Russia and China thought they were rolling into a defenseless corridor. What they didn't realize is that they had just accepted Ukraine's invitation into a minefield, a drone storm, and a wall of artillery fire. This was no retreat. It was the opening move of a carefully engineered ambush that would erase their spearhead. Here's how it unfolded. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Why would Ukraine deliberately turn off its radars and move its frontline units back only hours before Russian armor crossed the border? For any commander watching from the outside, the move looked like surrender before the fight even began. Radar dishes stopped spinning, signal screens went blank. Infantry evacuated entire villages without firing a shot. Patrols that usually scanned the tree lines and river crossings disappeared like smoke. On paper, it resembled a gap wide enough to drive a steel wall through. And that is exactly what the Russian leadership thought they saw. The decision wasn't about weakness, but about timing. Ukrainian intelligence had tracked long armored columns, pushing out of staging grounds, engines rumbling in the cold night. Drones flying high over the countryside spotted the dust trails of tanks and armored vehicles stretching for miles. At the same time, reports came in of Chinese ships moving in formation through the Black Sea, their landing craft bristling with troops, vehicles, and supplies. The pattern suggested a synchronized strike, with armor punching across land while warships threatened Odessa from the sea. Any normal playbook would say strengthen defenses, bring forward artillery, keep radar locked on the threat. Ukraine did the opposite. For Russian and Chinese planners watching through satellites and scout drones, this reversal was hard to ignore. A corridor opening in Sumy looked empty, like the defenders gave up their hold. The temptation was clear. Push forward fast, exploit the gap, and crush resistance before it regrouped. But by creating this image of weakness, Ukraine achieved something far more dangerous than a static defense. They created hope inside the invader's mind. Hope of an easy breakthrough. For an armored spearhead, confidence breeds speed, and speed can lead straight into disaster when the road is chosen for you. Ukraine magnified the illusion. Households were ordered out of villages close to the route, leaving streets silent, windows dark, not a single civilian left to give away military activity. Entire battalions faded back towards secondary lines, leaving footprints in the mud that looked like panic. Even signals intelligence trailed off as radios stayed silent. At dawn, Russian operators staring at radar screens saw wide gaps with no returning signatures. It wasn't simply absence. They read it as opportunity. What they didn't realize was that every meter of that space had been mapped and engineered. Fields that looked like open farmland were stitched with mines buried in careful patterns that would funnel movement in predictable directions. Behind forest belts and inside barns, hidden staging points waited. Drone teams sat with engines cold, controllers wired into silent command posts with strict orders not to move too soon. The entire zone was a kill box, an area designed to swallow machines whole, and the trap required patience. Hours passed as Russian columns rolled deeper, chewing up dirt tracks, cutting across fallow land, breathing easier when no opposition fired a shot. Chinese commanders believed the radar silence proved Ukrainian garrisons had been withdrawn. No naval patrols remained. Each side thought its gamble had been validated by the lack of resistance. What they didn't recognize was that the absence of fire was the bait itself. The longer they advanced, the more certain they became, and the deeper they walked into the trap. By the time engines echoed through abandoned streets and convoy commanders rallied their troops to push harder, Ukraine had everything lined up. Hidden charges waited, artillery crews stayed locked on coordinate grids, and flights of drones were armed but dead silent. The blind spot wasn't a weakness, it was a mirror held up to the invader's own overconfidence. And the instant steel tracks clanked into the heart of that corridor, machines met machines, and the first detonations shattered the illusion. What happens when a billion-dollar assault force meets suitcases full of drone bombs and concealed artillery? The answer unfolded within minutes as Russian T-90M tanks advanced into what they believed was cleared farmland near Sumy. Their commanders gave the order to push faster through the corridor, engines churning the mud as armored tracks bit into soft fields. Confidence radiated through the lead crews, convinced they were rolling toward an undefended route that would open the front wide. But in seconds, the noise of engines mixed with an entirely different sound, the high-pitched buzzing of dozens of drones drifting above the tree line. Suitcase-sized drones, each carrying shaped charges designed to pierce heavy armor, began dropping directly onto engine decks and turrets. The first impact tore through the rear plating of a T-90M, igniting ammunition within seconds. A deafening blast ripped its turret free, launching it skyward before crashing into the ground like scrap metal. Another two tanks behind it caught fire as charges fell faster than crews could react. Smoke and flashes erupted across the open fields. Survivors scrambled from hatches only to find more drones circling low. The sky that seemed empty an hour earlier now belonged to machines no bigger than a carry-on bag. Wagner mercenaries supporting the advance tried to regain control, shouting orders into radios already jammed by interference. Small fire teams leapt into nearby drainage ditches, firing rifles blindly at shapes overhead. Chaos spread as their commanders assumed they had stumbled into a pocket of resistance rather than a planned kill zone. Vehicles attempting to reverse slammed into hidden mines laid beneath the mud, detonating in brutal succession. What looked to them like chance ambush after chance ambush was actually the unveiling of a trap so carefully designed that every turn offered only destruction. Meanwhile, off the coast near Odessa, another front erupted. Chinese landing craft pushed forward in formation, crews bracing for beach assault as waves pounded steel ramps. Above them, Turkish-built TB-2 drones and Polish warmates swarmed suddenly from high altitude. One strike slammed directly into a craft packed with soldiers and armored transports. The blast tore through the deck before the vessel even touched sand, killing dozens instantly and setting others ablaze inside the hold. The attack triggered panic across the flotilla as engines sputtered and fires erupted along the waterline. On shore, a Ukrainian Special Forces operator lay concealed with a laser designator. Though fully aware that his position would be revealed the moment he switched it on, he marked the silhouette of another ship through drifting sea mist. Seconds later, a drone homed on the reflected light, plunging into its stern and detonating with such force that the vessel listed nearly 40 degrees, spilling men and vehicles into the sea. He never made it back, but his targeting shaped the strike that crippled the assault. Back inland, the crescendo intensified. Ukrainian artillery suddenly opened from concealed positions, lighting the landscape with rapid salvos. Shells burst across fields crowded with stalled armor. Simultaneously, mobile air defense systems hidden near forest lines powered up, targeting enemy reconnaissance drones that had circled above for hours. In less than 2 minutes, dozens of those eyes in the sky were shredded by missiles and autocannon fire, leaving the attackers blind. Without guidance, armored columns lost coordination. Crews fired ineffectively into empty tree lines, while command channels descended into static and confusion. The victory outside Sumy wasn't measured only by destroyed tanks or captured troops. Its weight came from showing that deception, patience, and preparation could dismantle raw force. A $1.2 billion offensive collapsed not because Ukraine was stronger, but because Ukraine was smarter. Technology amplified that intelligence, and a single soldier's final act carried the strike that crippled a landing. Victory existed in the trap, not the numbers. So ask yourself, does modern war reward better weapons or better illusions? And more importantly, should nations spend energy designing devastating traps or finding ways to keep them from being sprung at all?